Here we are again. Abby, the fish. How I always love this name. This is perfect for you, the fish. If you would now be born in March, then it would be amazing, right? I mean,
I don't even know if I could handle it every day.
That's good. That's good. Listen, thanks for joining again a call with me and talk about swimming. So let's talk about swimming. And today I have something nice for you. I've done it already before with other people, and with Alex from Scale Swimming, and with Jan Wolfgarten I did it too. Myth busting. Let's do some myth busting. I have my favorite myths, and you actually, I think you have another one too. And let's start with one of mine. Bubbles around your hands. What do you think? Really important technical thing to do. What do you think? Tell me more.
Well, I feel like bubbles around your hands doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad bubbles. Like when your hand is moving through water, it's going to create bubbles naturally. And sometimes the bubbles that are connected to your forearm and your palm for freestyle are good bubbles. But if you're getting a lot of like splashes on entry and exit and stuff like that, where you can kind of clean up the bubbles and the splashes, that might be advantageous. But I do think there's a lot of focus on the wrong bubbles.
Good one. Well, also it depends on what you do. If you do long distance, or if you are a sprinter, or like middle distance. Yep. If you're a sprinter, I mean, if you're a sprinter, the bubbles you cannot erase. And funny enough, if someone has watched my one of my FPV videos, and where I sprint to 25 meter, you actually can see what you meant about the bubbles is the bubbles are here.
Yeah.
And so when I enter, they will be here, but here there is none. Again, I would already argue we are a bit too deep, or I am already too deep, because the bubbles, first of all, if you start out, listen, forget about the bubbles, really. It's nothing to worry about. And it's nothing you can change where you can hold your hands like this. You won't get there if you start out. It's nothing which you need to add on to your list of proper kicks, body rotation, proper high elbow catch. It's not on that list. If you haven't mastered the high elbow catch, or like a proper freestyle technique where you're, let's say, in the area of 50 for the triathletes for 55 minutes on 3.8 Ks in an Ironman race. If you're not in that region, the bubbles will not, until you're not in that region, bubbles should not concern you. Concern you. And you have youngsters. Has ever a youngster come to you about bubbles around his hands?
I think there's been very few, but I do remember this one kid who absorbed a lot of online content, and he had found a video on YouTube that said, like reducing drag. And so I actually appreciated what he was trying to ask me, because he was basically trying to ask whether we should reduce the bubbles to reduce drag. So he was kind of trying to learn the ins and outs of how everything interacts in the water. But all the bubbles, right? It was just all bubbles are bad versus kind of what I said before. Yeah. No, you apply force to the water, you're going to create bubbles, and some of those bubbles are a good thing, and you want them to be following your hand. So it opened up for a good discussion. But a 10-year-old that's bumbling around and swimming, they're most likely not going to come up to you and ask about the water bubbles.
I love that actually. And that's actually the right way to look at it. And also, I bet you had the counter side to it. And also brings another myth, which is also there. The splashing when entering the water. That's another myth. It's fun enough. I forgot about this one, but it relates to each other.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Also the slapping noise. If someone tells me, it's too much slapping and whatsoever. I don't want to be violent here, but that slap you shouldn't worry about, really not. I don't know. It's no. These are two things which I think called myth busting, because funny enough, if you have a good technique, the bubbles and these things will be eliminated by itself. Funny enough. That's the statement I put out there. Yeah, so two myths we busted, which is not really important. I thank God you have the same opinion about it. Would be also an interesting discussion if you didn't have the same opinion about it. But so far, I haven't found anyone who said, no, you need to look at this very early on. I said, nah, it's not really the thing.
Yeah.
You had a good point before we actually started the call.
It was on training volume and how much should you train to achieve your goals.
Good one. That's also one, which is not necessarily a myth busting, but it's different ways of. I would call it like my other myth busting, which I come up with later. It's more different ways of training. It's like different how you learn it. So I like that because I was a middle distance swimmer having a lot of endurance, was taught by someone going to the lengths of train like Popov, which is quality over quantity. And there we would not go over 5Ks in a session, 5 kilometers per session. But the thing was, you had very, you needed to have a very high technique, and the intervals were very specific and these kind of things. So yeah, tell me more about your view on that one, on that myth.
So yeah, I definitely was trained under some very traditional coaches that was quantity over quality. So I did a lot of yardage young, and I do think there's like a degree of mental grit that comes from that, and also like a crazy aerobic base that even out very much, but I can go to a practice and beat 95% of the other adult athletes because I think I just have this reserve that I've created that I can pull from. Doesn't mean that it's easy for me to like go fast now, but I still feel like my aerobic window in spectrum is larger. So I think there's a dance, which is why this is always kind of a hot topic on training of like, how much sprinting should you do? How much aerobic work should you do? How much lactate should you do? But I do think what I like where swimming's going, because these conversations are becoming more mainstream and people are asking and doing, very extreme different ways and performing well. So it's forcing people to like rethink and talk about, well, how did you get this guy who's a 200er who's not doing more than 4,000 a practice go X, like that possible. Whereas before it was like, if you're over 100, you were swimming 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 yards, meters practice. Like it was just work on work.
True. I guess it's a nuance. First of all, it's your body type. What plays for you? Like what is for me? For me, I always need a lot of volume. That's why I started very early on to do come to the pool half an hour earlier, and did another extra set to the training which I had with my coach back in the days. So I need a lot of volume, but it was a combination of both. I did the volume myself, added the technique and the high technique and quality with my coach afterwards. So it was a nuance, and this is how I train now also for myself. So I guess it's very individual, I think.
Yeah.
Tom Dolan would argue, no, we do quantity. I don't care about technique, do quantity. For him, it was working because he was world record holder, Olympic champion. But then we have an opposite side. Yes, it's a sprinter, but I do believe he could also do 200. Cam McAvoy, who actually goes in a completely different direction, whereas I don't think he does that much swimming in himself when he was a very youngster, or he completely changed now. I don't know. People confuse this. I think people confuse the quality and quantity thing or training is, especially when they're starting out with swimming, and grown-ups get confused with. They would see quality as a technical training and quantity as the training. And there it's the confusion which gets generated. I think in our field, when we talk about pros or about professional swimming or swimming as general, as a sport, as going to the European Championships or the US trials, or like the youngsters you have, There it's, I think, I like that the conversation starts for the people who are starting out with triathlon or open water swimming and whatsoever. Quality doesn't mean just technical training. It means that you get taught a certain technique, and then afterwards, when you do 10 times 100, you try to have every 10 times the same technique over and over again without someone standing at the pool and saying, yeah, you did that wrong, you need that wrong, you need that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I do think that quality work is like taking the technique from lower swimming, trying to add some repeats to it with some stress, right? Like, so you're mimicking, whether you are open water swimming or competitive lap swimming, what you're going to do in that race, right? Like if you're swimming a 5K, you're going to have to maintain for as long as you possibly can with great technique versus a 500 in the pool, 20 laps is the same deal. So I do think people get very monotonous with sometimes their training, especially adults. Like they do this and this day, and this is what it is, and I swim 1,000, and then I do an 800, and then I do 550s, etc. And there's not enough spiking of the heart rates that need to happen, and that most of that heart rate variations happen when you're doing quality stuff.
Exactly. But again, quality is not equal like technical training where you do technical or catch-ups or whatsoever. It's really quality. It means a proper technique, or if you see your hand goes a certain way, you need to have it within swimming proper, normally, like this kind of thing. I think there is a confusion with it, but that's a good discussion. Maybe you need to have, I don't know, we need to have that once, a conversation with someone who has a different view on it and whatsoever. I think it very much lies in the middle.
Yeah.
For me, it did, or it does. It very much lies in the middle of what is good and so on. It's very individual to the people. That's why I like how the US has some of like what I've heard or what I've seen as well. They have different teams, you know. You have the middle distance team, and then you have the sprinters and all kind of that. They get a different training out of it. Not everywhere they have it. I mean, it's also a question of money and persona or people standing at the pool as coaches, but there I see it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not on an extreme side of that spectrum. I've had plenty of conversations with people that are very quality related. Like that's what they do. They go in and they sprint repeats, and they only swim for an hour, and it's like total one side. And then I've also had conversations with the people that don't believe in any of that, and they think you need to train 80 times more than the length of your event or whatever you're doing, because they believe that for whatever, physiology explanation they have as well. So I think that's the cool part about coaching though, right? Because then you can kind of decide like, okay, I agree with this, I don't agree with this, or like I have this specific athlete who is responding differently to this set than this other athlete. So now you can kind of it's like everything in swimming is getting more customized. Like we're getting more athlete versus like having a program and telling everybody to do it. And then the ones that do it really well are the ones that are here versus the ones that don't respond well to it are like still down here.
No, I like that. That's a good one. That's a really good one. The only thing which I think doesn't work is, I think there you have it with the volume and the quality and everything. I think there is the individualism. The only thing which doesn't work for me is, I think it's nonsense, is that you say someone, what they usually do is when they start off, that's the picture from the ground, says, yeah, I go 3 times a week, I do 2Ks. I said, yeah, how do you do the 2Ks? Or the 3Ks or whatever. And then they say, oh yeah, in one go. And I say, yeah, okay, no, that doesn't work. Like we are creatures of habits. That will never work. Even if you tell me you go 6 times 5Ks, it doesn't get you faster. If you don't do intervals, forget it.
Yeah. I feel like that's where it's like it goes in beyond the pool. Like you want to spark a change in your swimming, running, nutrition habits. You have to physically change something from whatever you're currently doing. And a lot of that comes with like the plan, right? If the plan is the same thing and your body's gotten used to it and it can respond and it can do it, and you're consistently able to do that output, then it's not being challenged. Like it's now a next step and change something, add intervals, at a session, whatever it is, intensity, duration, time, like you got to improve and you have to force the curve up to make the improvement.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So, as I said, we had the splashing and the bubbles around your hands, and then we had the quantity, like volumes question or the myth, and then we have the next one, or is one of the obvious ones as well, is the breathing pattern.
This is a hot topic of debate.
Very hot topic.
I just put an Instagram post up with the handsets from EO Sports Lab that measure like the hand velocity. And I put this up, because I knew people they love talking about the gallop stroke, right? The breathing every stroke, galloping rhythm, and the debate on whether that's right. As you've said before, the elite swimmers are doing that at the Olympic Games, but then age group athletes, not very many of them are doing it. Not very many coaches are teaching it. So somehow there's like a shift in the progression in competitive to the Olympic Games. And with this data, what we found was, like if you're doing a catch-up or a gallop stroke, it's more of a catch-up stroke. So your force curves are crisscrossed versus if you're doing a more balanced stroke, you have a consistent propulsion being generated with the same amount of space between the arms, which it makes sense, like in the reality of what you can visually see if you take a video and slow down someone's stroke. But I still err on like always training balance, because I do think people train more than they ever race. But I'm not too sure how I feel on the galloping as far as like if it's totally a bad thing. Like I used to be like, no galloping. It doesn't make sense. Like we don't love it, and I know you have a totally opposite opinion.
I do. But I like that. Actually, put that aside. I mean, the breathing pattern. Let's deep dive. Keep that aside. I like the one with galloping, and I like what you said. The thing is, the birthplace where both opinions start is one thing, and you said it yourself. You need to be able to swim balanced. You need to have both stroke equally done, as equal as possible. So that means if you rotate that much, you need to have the other side as much. Like body rotation in freestyle. So you need to have both sides. Needs to be a mirror in the middle, and it needs to look at both sides the same thing. So it's that I argue, and you need to be able. And now we bring in the breathing pattern too. You need to train both. The one breathing pattern you want afterwards with the bilateral breathing, or like breathing every third time, every fifth time, whatsoever. You need to train both.
Yeah.
So I started out, I have a really good kick. I'm not kick driven. I don't have a kick driven style. I have a good kick.
Yeah.
And when I was a youngster, and when we learned how to swim, was gallop. No one knew about galloping back in the days. Like that came with Matt Biondi, and later on it was coming a bit later. So this is something which I learned it, like being flat and have an equal stroke on both sides. You just move it into freestyle. It depends on the distance, where you have a longer stroke length versus the cadence when it comes to sprinting. So when you did longer distance or middle distance, you had a longer stroke. The cadence was a bit lower, and when you did sprinting, it was more the windmill style, where you have like more cadence at the cost maybe of a bit of the stroke length. That is the thing. The galloping came when we were stronger. We got stronger, and it was mainly, and you don't see a lot of women to do it. It's also when you look at the Olympic Games and whatsoever, you see predominantly men who do it. And there it has to do, and I can't always gallop. If I'm fit, I can. I was in the time when I didn't swim as much as I did now, before I went on my quest of the Ironman and whatsoever. When I was, so that was after my career, and then this time in between where I didn't really swim much, I couldn't have galloped, because that would be only up and down, up and down, up and down. Galloping is only efficient if you can throw yourself forward.
Okay.
If you can go up, if you only do that, it can be actually working against you. And that's actually what you proved with what you said. Like if you don't go forward and if you have a certain speed, it is actually going against you.
Mm-hmm.
And and if you can't sustain it, that's the biggest problem. If you can't sustain the forward motion and the speed, and maybe even over the course of, let's say, a 400 meter freestyle or 200 meters, you can get faster or keep the pace up.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would argue the galloping to the style which that person has makes sense. Problem is, if you cannot sustain the galloping, it will be counterproductive.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I know that there's more lift in the stroke with the galloping stroke because like the arms are doing two different things, and so you have to kind of raise up, but you don't want to be doing this like bobbing up and down because obviously you want your directional velocity to be mostly forward. And I do think that there, especially in the age group realm, there are certain athletes that naturally just fall into the stroke. And that's kind of where my brain has been going because, okay, yeah, we see it at the Olympic Games, but what do I do with like this 12, 13-year-old who's like
too early?
Like, yeah, it's too early. It's going to hurt their shoulders. It might hurt their neck. Like, can they really produce the force needed to generate a faster speed overall, like at that age? And so for coaches, they want to know, right? Like, should we switch it? Should we not? Like, and then you watch the olders, like they want to know, they want to be like Michael Phelps. They want to be like, Katie Ledecky's, like they see it. And so they emulate it. And then,
but I can bring this closer. It's the same thing as with butterfly, breathing to the side and breathing to the front.
Yeah,
I would put it on the same. I would put it in the same bracket. It's not the same thing, but it's a very individual thing. Because some people, we had a good friend of mine. She was top 10 in the world in 200 meter butterfly. Her brother used to be he just finished his career as a triathlete. He was a long distance triathlete, very good guy. And his sister used to be this butterflyer. So she did, but she was not always a butterfly. She was a backstroke swimmer at the beginning. And then at some point, and she had always struggles with butterfly.
Yeah.
But she always was taught to breathe to the front. And then the coach said, listen, I don't know who he showed her. I don't know which swimmer he showed her. My coach showed her. He said, maybe we need to start to breathe to your side. So instead of lifting, you just tilt it, and that way you don't need to lift your body up that much, because she somehow couldn't do it. That did the trick. All of a sudden, she was a flyer. She had she was top 10 in the world. She qualified like a couple of years in a row, and she had a 2:08 in 200 butterfly, and this is a good time. I mean, she went to the Olympic Games and whatsoever. So we concluded with that. Thank you very much for the call, and let's find another topic we can talk about and knock ourselves out in that sense.
Sweet.
Thank you.